The 2003 to 2004 Detroit Pistons are a bit of an anomaly within the history of NBA champions. On the court, they didn't have a true superstar, with Ben Wallace being the only player on the team to earn an All-Star or All-NBA selection in that championship season. They also didn't have a truly great perimeter scorer, nor a dominant offensive post threat. And from a front office perspective, the title-winning blueprint they followed is generally considered to be impossible to replicate. As I outlined in a Building a Champion video last summer, Detroit was able to build their starting five through 4 trades for underappreciated players in Chauncey Billups, Rip Hamilton, Rasheed Wallace, and Ben Wallace, and a 23-year-old second-year player that was drafted 23rd overall in the previous draft in Tayshaun Prince, creating a team that both worked perfectly together and didn't require a ton of assets to build. Now, that isn't to say that there weren't mistakes made. I'm looking at you, Darko Milicic, but no front office is perfect. And even with those mistakes, the Pistons did an incredible job of building not only that championship team, but also a team that would go on to make the finals the following year and 3 more Eastern Conference finals after that. Which makes it all that more surprising that they were completely unable to use those pieces to set themselves up for future success, as they essentially gave away their entire title-winning team for absolutely nothing, and have been trying to recover from those mistakes ever since. Welcome back, everybody. My name is Tucker, and in today's video, I'm going to be talking about how the Detroit Pistons, a team that made so many of the correct front office moves in the early 2000s, simply gave away the core of their championship team just a few years later for essentially nothing, and how it still haunts them to this day. So let's go through each of the important players in this one by one. First up is arguably the most valuable asset on the roster in the years following 2004, Chauncey Billups. He won the Finals MVP in 2004 and was just 27 years old at the time that they won the title, and continued to have 4 more productive and healthy seasons in Detroit in the years following, which made him a great trade asset for an up-and-coming team that needed a steady point guard and a veteran, championship-proven leadership presence. Enter the Denver Nuggets, who had just won 50 games with Carmelo Anthony and Allen Iverson leading the way, and sensed that Billups might be just what the team needed to make a deep playoff run. And they were right. After trading for Billups in the beginning of the 2008-2009 season, the Nuggets made it all the way to the Western Conference Finals before falling to the eventual champion LA Lakers in a competitive 6-game series. Denver's price for bringing in such a proven player in Billups? 33-year-old Allen Iverson, who had no such championship experience, way more mileage on his body, and was significantly more beat up physically than Billups was at that point in their careers. Iverson lasted just 54 games in an ugly stint in Detroit, while Billups continued to be productive in Denver, New York, and to a certain extent LA for the next few seasons. One player down, 0 compensation in return for Detroit. On to the next player now, Rip Hamilton. He was just 25 years old when Detroit won the title in 2004, making him a piece that, understandably, the Pistons wanted to keep around as they continued to try and contend over the next few seasons. However, they continued to hold on to him much longer than they should have, even after the Iverson disaster in the 2008-2009 season. Ultimately, Hamilton's body just didn't hold up, and by the 2009-2010 season, he was pretty much done as a durable, productive NBA player. The Pistons waived him in December of 2011 to save some money, a prime example of holding on to a player just a bit too long and losing out on any potential trade value that they could have had. 2 players down, still nothing in return for the Pistons. Next up is the youngest member of the championship core, Tayshaun Prince. He lasted 8.5 more seasons in Detroit after that 2004 title, before eventually being moved to Memphis in January of 2013 for, essentially, Jose Calderon, who left as a free agent the following offseason. Now, at this point in the video, it is important to note that the Pistons were still very good in the years following the 2004 title, making the finals the next year and the Eastern Conference Finals in the following 3 seasons. But by the time that they traded Billups in the 2008-2009 season, it was clear that it was over and that they were moving on to a new era with just one 30-win season from 2009 to 2013, which makes it even more strange that both Hamilton and Prince were still on the roster for multiple seasons after the Billups trade, rather than flipping them for future assets. Teams are generally quicker to identify when it's time to move on from aging players now, and if this happened in 2020, I'm sure the Pistons would have moved Prince and Hamilton much sooner, similar to how the Grizzlies moved on from the grit and grind era, but that really doesn't make it any more defensible that they got essentially nothing in return for the 3 players that they traded from their championship core. 3 players down, 0 compensation for Detroit. Next up is Rasheed Wallace, and he was already 30 years old at the time of winning the title, but still managed to be a productive player over the next few seasons for the Pistons before leaving as a free agent in 2009. Now, this one is pretty defensible, as they technically could have traded away Wallace at the deadline that season along with Billups, but given that he was getting older and would need a new contract, it isn't surprising that they weren't able to get anything back for him. 4 players down, still nothing for the Pistons. And last up is Rasheed Wallace, the only All-Star / All-NBA selection from that 2004 title-winning team. Similar to Rasheed, Ben was 30 years old when they won the title and was still a good player in the years following, even good enough to get massively overpaid by the Bulls in free agency in 2006, becoming the first piece of the core to leave Detroit despite being the last one I am covering here. And there you have it, an entire championship-winning starting five and one of the most balanced starting fives in NBA championship history, essentially given away for nothing from 2006 to 2013. Now, at this point in the video, you could make the argument that each of these players were either too old, too broken down, or simply not valuable enough to get much in return to help the Pistons build towards the future. And you would be right, to an extent. For both Ben and Rasheed Wallace, it was unlikely that the Pistons would be able to get much back for them. Despite the big contract given to Ben, both of them were clearly declining and left while the team was still good, so you couldn't really expect the team to move them while they were still making conference finals appearances. For the other three, however, there really is no defense for Detroit. I already outlined how Billups was still a really good player and the team should have prioritized the future much more in that trade rather than going with the flashy Iverson move. That Nuggets team was clearly in win-now mode with Carmelo's free agency looming and likely would have given up younger assets to Detroit while sending Iverson elsewhere to make room for Billups. And if that failed, I'm sure they could have gotten some nice young pieces from a number of other contenders around the league that wanted a championship-proven player like Billups. And the same goes for Hamilton and Prince too. That Billups trade in 2008 should have been the tipping point for Detroit when they realized that their days of contention were over, at least for the next few seasons. Both of those players were just entering their 30s and productive guys, and just like Billups likely would have gotten them at least some kind of young asset in the trade market if they'd pulled the trigger back then. Plus, we've seen plenty of teams in the past capitalize on the veteran assets of a past championship team to build for the future, with the Celtics trading Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce along with Rajon Rondo being the first team that really comes to mind, so it's not like this was impossible. However, the Pistons went in a completely different direction, handing out big contracts to free agents Ben Gordon and Charlie Villanueva in the summer of 2009 while keeping Hamilton and Prince on the roster, with the hopes that, along with new young point guard Rodney Stuckey, they could start to build towards being an Eastern Conference power once again. And, well, it didn't really go so well. The Gordon and Villanueva contracts were both disasters for Detroit, Stuckey flamed out, Prince and Hamilton got old, and they had no team success to show for their big swings in the summer of 2009. Now, in a way, I can appreciate the Pistons thinking that if they could win a title without a star, they could put together a nice playoff team without one as well. But as it turned out, that wasn't the case without Billups, Rasheed Wallace, or Ben Wallace, and with an older Hamilton and Prince. And as a result, in the years that followed, the Pistons have suffered the consequences of continuing to push for the playoffs rather than rebuilding when they should have. They have just 2 40-win seasons and playoff appearances to their name since the end of the 2008-2009 season, with a consistently poor draft record and a habit of building teams with only a mediocre ceiling. And that pattern of a complete unwillingness to commit to a full rebuild is something that has followed Detroit into this new era as well, with the Blake Griffin trade in 2018 being the ultimate example of a team pushing themselves towards the middle with little chance that it will actually lead to any kind of real relevance. And now, as I pointed out in a previous video, the Pistons find themselves in a really tough spot, with little young talent on the roster, an oft-injured and highly paid Griffin still on the roster, and overall, one of the worst futures in the entire league. My hope is that the Pistons will learn from their past and commit to a full rebuild this time around, opening up cap space, developing their younger players, and finding the right pieces in the draft, while trying to get some kind of value out of Griffin and the other veterans on the roster in the trade market. But I personally can't help but wonder how this era of Pistons basketball might have looked a bit different had they done a better job of breaking down their championship team in the years following the 2004 title, rather than giving it away for basically nothing. And yeah, there you have it. That is going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you all very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.